Night Stalker for Intellivision, released in 1982 courtesy of Mattel Electronics, is an action game where you control the Night Stalker fellow whose name I don't know, and must outrun killer robots, mutant spiders, and cave-dwelling bats until you claim a 6-shooter to defend yourself against these creatures. And that's the main deal. You find a gun that's placed randomly in the cave, you shoot enemies who will respawn almost immediately afterwards, and you keep going until you eventually perish and lose all your lives. The monsters respawn from the same spots usually, so you could ambush them, but once you run out of bullets, a new gun will appear at some random point in the cave, sometimes right at the heart of pure evil. And so it's the endless circle of Night Stalker. Avoid monsters until you find a gun, shoot monsters until you run out of bullets, lather, rinse, repeat. As you rack up points and kill more monsters, the game will introduce new robotic threats for you to encounter, each one more dangerous than the last. You can hide out in your little sanctuary, the bright colored structure in the middle-ish of the maze, but do well enough and robots will eventually be able to destroy your little recluse and force you back on the run. You lose a life if you're shot by a robot or touch a robot or spider. Making contact with one of the bats will temporarily stun you. A nuisance early on, but can get costly as things get more hectic later on. Beyond that, there's not much to Night Stalker. There's no fanfare or anything like that. You just survive the wave of robots and monsters until you lose your last life. There's 3 speed settings you could choose from prior to starting a new game, 1 regular speed and 2 slower ones. You'll want to avoid the slower speed settings as they don't make things easier, only slower, or as some people would prefer to call it, methodical. And Night Stalker is definitely methodical. A much slower paced game that's more about survival than full-on action, aiming and timing your finite shots so that they hit their intended target, finding the best route to avoid certain death, knowing where enemies spawn to plan your ambushes, trying to claim a new weapon before the robots claim you. All of this makes Night Stalker the furthest thing from the typical cookie-cutter arcade-style fare of the time, and perhaps that's part of its appeal. It's more about planning your moves and your escape routes should you require one. It might look like a cross between Pac-Man and Berserk, but it plays like neither. It is its own unique entity. Control is a little more involved and takes a little getting used to the first time around, at least. You use the disc to control your night stalking fellow, surprisingly solid control all things considered, and to shoot, you actually use the number pad as there are keys mapped to shoot in one of 4 directions. This is where having the overlay helps tremendously in telling you which keys do what. It doesn't always work because the keypad itself is kind of mushy, and with the overlay, there's no real tactile sense to it, so every so often I may have to look down and check to make sure I'm pushing the right key because nothing is happening. Once you get the hang of things, it's not so bad. It plays fairly well. So you see that cavern in front of you, right? Those robots, those bats, the little bonum you control. Aside from the title screen, those are your graphics for the entirety of this game. And it looks fine. Nice dark cavern with a night blue background. Generic Intellivision guy that's in a bunch of games, I'd imagine. Bat kind of looks like a bat. Spider, I guess looks like a spider. The robots are nice and varied at least. Sound is at its most minimal here. A pulsing sound plays throughout amid the occasional beeps and bleeps. Not much, but it does get the job done in keeping the tension up, which is all I could ask for a game of this ilk. Overall, Night Stalker is a pretty good, pretty methodical game that emphasizes survival and planning ahead over pew pew pew. Once you get the hang of the controls, it's a breeze to get into before it becomes a struggle to play, and that's where things usually heat up. All in all, a fun little game worth checking out, and I believe that makes it 2 for 2 for Intellivision so far. Good stuff.